Hello everyone! A bar of pie chart can be used to transfer some of the data points to a second plot to increase visibility. They are summed up as others in the first plot. Today, you will see how to automate this feature to show a drill down based on a slicer selection. My example data has retail sales of some ice cream flavors and brands. Every time a different flavor is selected, it should be drilled down by brand in the second plot. The Format Data Series pane offers several options for automatic splitting of the data series between the two plots. By position, for example, the last three data entries at the bottom of the table, value or percentage value, for example, less than 10%. But the custom assignment requires manually selecting data points to move between the plots. So I will show you a solution for this based on using Microsoft Visual Basic for applications. My data range shows ice cream sales in 1,000 units, with each flavor being sold by several brands. As preparation work, I will convert this data range to a table by clicking it and pressing Ctrl and T together. Add a pivot chart. Add flavor and brand fields to access area and sales to the values area. Right-click on the chart and change the chart type to a bar of pie. Remove the legend. Change the title. And the colors. And move the chart to the left. Move the pivot table to the right. And remove the grid lines. Let's also change the layout of the pivot table to a tabular form without any totals or subtotals, and sort based on the sales. I will also need a second pivot table to display the selection of a slicer. So let's add the pivot table. This time only flavor, as a field will be in the rows area. And add a slicer. Which I will move to sheet 1. Under Slicer Tools Options, let's increase the number of columns in the slicer, increase the width, decrease the height, and change the color. The flavor selected in the slicer, for example chocolate, will be shown on sheet 3 in the cell A4. So I need 2 pivot tables in total, one for the pivot chart, where all the flavors are shown, and the other should be filtered by the slicer. So in sheet 3, where the pivot table of the slicer is, I will need to embed a macro which will get triggered every time that this pivot table gets updated. Let's open the Visual Basic editor with the key combination Alt and F11 Double-click on the Sheet 3 object in the Project Explorer window and add the following macro. Option explicit at the top is necessary for preventing typing mistakes in the variable names, because it is going to show an error later if there are any undeclared variables. The macro is going to be triggered when a pivot table is updated on the sheet in which it is embedded. Now let's declare the variables. PyChart declared as chart is going to be the bar of PyChart. PySeries is going to be its series. I declared as integer is necessary for looping through the data points. Categories declared as variant is the array of the x-axis values of the series. Selection declared as range is going to be the cell showing the selection of the slicer. PT declared as pivot table and PF declared as pivot field. Let's define the variables. Selection is going to be the cell A4 on sheet 3 of the active workbook. This is the cell showing the selection of the slicer. PT is going to be pivot table 1 on the active sheet and PF its first pivot field. Sheet 1 is referred to as active sheet because the slicer is positioned here and the selection will happen on this sheet. PT is the pivot table of the pivot chart, called pivot table 1, and PF is flavor. It is important to keep the two pivot tables on different sheets because the macro is triggered by updating any pivot table on the sheet in which it is embedded. PyChart is the bar of PyChart, and it is chart 1 on the active sheet. PySeries is set to be its series. On error, resume next is just for troubleshooting. In the first step, the pivot field should be collapsed by setting show detail to false, and only the pivot item whose name matches the value of the cell A4 should be expanded to show the brands by setting show detail to true. Only after this step is complete should the x-axis values be assigned to the categories variable. In the second step, the data points have to be assigned to the second plot. The macro will loop from 1 to the number of data points in the series, and if the equivalent category contains the value of cell A4 followed by some characters, then the point will be transferred to the second plot, else it will stay in the first plot. I use the operator like for contains, and please don't forget to put spaces here because otherwise the macro may show an error. Now let's test. Let's add data labels. With category name and percentage, position inside end, and choose cookie dough. Now the flavor cookie dough is broken down by brand. If I choose chocolate, then chocolate will also be broken down by brand. If you would like to use this code in your own file, then please adapt the sheet names, the cell reference, the pivot table number, and the chart name to your own workbook. The macro needs to be embedded into the sheet on which the pivot table of the slicer is. If you like this video, please like and subscribe for more practical spreadsheet solutions.